We all receive inspiration and influence from other people in our lives, or maybe people who aren't directly in our lives, but have still placed a great influence on us. In this episode, I'm going to be covering the three authors who have really influenced the way that I look at fantasy and that influenced the way that I want to tell my epic fantasy stories. Hello, everybody. Welcome again. My name is Alex Shagir, and I am an epic fantasy writer. My first novel, Breaking, is going to be coming out in the next couple months. Keep looking for that pre-order button. I'm going to be putting it out hopefully in the next month or so. I'm excited for you to be able to get your hands on it. In this episode, I'll talk about the three authors, epic fantasy authors, who've influenced my writing. First, I kind of want to give a little shout out. I actually didn't have this in my notes, but something that just came to mind. A book that really greatly helped me was On Writing by Stephen King. I haven't read much of Stephen King's books actually, but that book that he wrote was fantastic. So if you're ever interested in just learning about writing, if you're a writer yourself, or if you're just kind of curious about the craft in general or Stephen King's story, that book is fantastic. So definitely take a look at that. Now, on to the specific epic fantasy authors that have influenced my thought geared towards fantasy. A little surprised if you've been following me all this time. Tolkien is first on the list. I'll kind of skip through his influence on me, specifically like earlier and how I was introduced to him. I've covered that in previous topics before, but I'll go through how he's influenced me, his writing and what he's done. I'll start by saying the least that he's influenced me is just in his writing in general, the prose by which he tells his story. There's nothing wrong with it. And I enjoy reading how he wrote, but writing has just advanced over time. Just better methods of communicating, your thoughts, character, describing things, telling a story. So there's nothing wrong with his writing style, and he was the first one to do it in this genre. He wrote, a long time ago. So I just a little kind of side note there. However, I will still say though I still enjoyed how he wrote. It's just my style of writing will be much different than what you would pick up and read in one of his books. The one thing that the main thing I think that I just love about Tolkien's works is that when I open up The Lord of the Rings, when I read The Silmarillion, when I read The Hobbit, and any of his books that he's written or notes, I feel like that it is a real world that he is talking about. There's a few things that make it possible, I think, for him to do this. One of them that I think kind of goes unnoticed is the use of elves in his story. How, like for instance, like Elrond and Galadriel and a few others in the Lord of the Rings. Now, not in the movie, but in the book, you have Glorfindel as well. How all of these elves will span life across not nearly the whole entire lifespan of Tolkien's world, but enough of it to kind of be considered most of it, right? And so you have this sense of people living in the now, the present, but then living in the past centuries and centuries ago. And it creates this link to this real world history that's come to life, where if you're watching Lord of the Rings or if you're reading the books, you have a sense of when they're talking to these elves, wow, these are elves that have seen things that the people around them just either know very little about or know nothing about. And it kind of creates this scope of this large epic real world that is really lived in. Then of course if you ever read the Silmarillion, just brings it all to life. I might have to just talk about the Silmarillion at some point, but instead of going down that rabbit hole, I'll try to keep this episode concise. So that's one thing that I really enjoyed about Tolkien. And I know that it's kind of it's kind of looked down upon almost to kind of write your own Silmarillion, and I haven't, and to kind of world build to that extreme. And I do see the flaws and negatives and positives, but for me, when I tell a story in one of my books, it is a story being told. It's not a world building story, if that makes sense. I'm not writing a Silmarillion in each of my books. However, in my head, I have my own version of a Silmarillion, and where I've written notes elsewhere, where I can read one of my books and know how it makes sense going back. So I think having that fully fleshed out history of the world that where even though people are reading in the present when they read my books, that there's so much more history looking back. I'd like to share some of that at some point in my life, but I want to focus on the actual like present day stories to tell first. Again, another really large influence is it's even though it's not part of the writing, it's part of epic fantasy. Is the maps of that Tolkien wrote, and he he drew a lot of them. I love map making. I'm actually making my own maps for my books, and in another week or so, I'm going to be sitting down and recording a video of me making the map for my first book. That's going to be in my book, and I'll probably do a few episodes on that. So that'll be really really fun. I enjoy map making, and it's all because of him. I enjoy looking at his maps. I enjoy just looking at maps of the world too. I have a map in my office, and I'll just get up randomly during the day and start looking at it, seeing where things are. And again, that brings a sense of realism to the world as well, where you can look at it and think about how often, even though you might not specifically go up and look at it, if you see a globe or a map and you just kind of stare at it and you know, okay, that's, where I am on Earth, and whatever thoughts come to mind. So when you look at an epic fantasy map, I think your mind automatically gears towards, oh, this is a place, this is a real place. Where are they on the map? And it goes a long way to creating a sense of realism for the reader. So very much influenced me there. I could probably go on and on about all the things that Tolkien has kind of influenced my way of thinking about epic fantasy, but we'll leave it at that for right now. The second author, Stephen R. Donaldson. This one, so you might not have heard of him, even if you do enjoy epic fantasy. He wrote the Thomas Covenant series. There's 3 different series spread over, I think, 30 years. But the first one came out in, I think, the early or mid 70s. I could be off on my dates. Maybe it's the late 70s. He wrote the Thomas Covenant series, and then more recently, The Great Gods War. Very much different from his Thomas Covenant series, though. It's the Covenant ones that kind of influenced me. With Donaldson, if you've read him, it's a love or hate relationship. You either love his books or you hate his books. And honestly, I get both sides. I can see why people do not like reading his books. I happen to be on the side of loving them. And I think a big part of it is my dad giving me the books when I was really young. I say really young. I was probably 10 or 11 when I read them, and I've read them several times since. It's a different read, and there's different arguments on the main character, Thomas Covenant. The simplest way to put it is he's a sort of anti-hero type. Doesn't want to take the banner, doesn't want to take it. He makes poor decisions along the way. Sometimes, a lot of times, I think purposefully. There's just a lot of things to dislike about the guy. And so he's kind of falls into that category. Again, it gets into more kind of the nuances of it if you care to go down that rabbit hole. But think about the story as that if you've never read the books before. The reason why he influenced me, Donaldson's writing, and again, I read it when I was, around 10 or 11. I've read it since, and every single time I'm captivated by the characters that Donaldson wrote. I feel like that, even though his style of writing is considered maybe a little bit archaic, some of the words he uses, there's a lot of flourish in his book. It's not as tight as other writers. I really enjoy like the dramatic emotions that he conveys from his characters in the story beats. I read once someone, maybe I was on Reddit reading about it, but he said that what he loves about Donaldson's books is that every chapter that he comes to and he sees the title name, after rereading the books a couple times, he knows exactly the feeling that's associated with that chapter. And it almost reminds me in a way of Quentin Tarantino's movies where his stories have these big, long scenes in it, and and you get excited for what's coming. Donaldson's books are like that too. It's not just, a new chapter. You forget about the title and you just keep reading and reading and reading. Donaldson's books have these grand, epic moments, and they fill almost every chapter of the book with the characters and the story. And that's what I love about it. I feel very invested in the characters and in the story that he tells. And what I like about his world, even though he doesn't go into as much looking into the past as Tolkien does, although he does do that a little bit, I feel like Donaldson's worlds are also very much real. Both Middle Earth and Tolkien's world at large, as well as the land, which is the world called in Donaldson's book, more or less. both feel so real to me when I read them. And I think about them quite often. I think about the worlds that they made, and I can picture, being there, and I can picture me where I'm going across the map. And to me, that just brings out so much life to the characters, the story, and the world itself. Again, the list goes on when it comes to Donaldson. I could keep going on about him, but I'll move on to the final one, Brandon Sanderson. This one might be kind of a no-brainer. The biggest guy in epic fantasy. Well, you can argue about since when, but at least right now he is. So a few ways that he's influenced me. He's influenced me least of all than the other two. I think because I didn't read Sanderson until after college, actually. And so just kind of later in my life, I've already developed a lot of feelings and ideas of how I see epic fantasy and how I want to write my own books. But the biggest way that he's probably influenced my writing is the scale and scope of his books. I knew I wanted to write longer epic fantasy all along, and I'm glad that Sanderson pushed the boundaries of what we consider a long book. To me, it kind of started with Robert Jordan. I probably should have added him on the list here, but I'll just make a side note about him because he's definitely influenced me as well as that first kind of large, grand scale storytelling. It kind of started with him, at least in my mind, of reading that I came across for these long, grand stories in a big epic series, and Brandon kind of took it and ran away with it, right? For me, that just really opened my horizons. Instead of putting me in a box where I have to say, okay, in order for someone to read my book and enjoy it, yes, I can write long ones, but they definitely have to be maybe between like around 6, 7, 800 pages in my book. That's at the max, right? I want people to be able to kind of feel comfortable reading a long book, but not feel overwhelmed by it, right? And then Sanderson just came in and said, no, I'm going to write a book as long as I want it to, and people are going to love it. So I'm really thankful for his advancement on the epic fantasy scene. Done a great job. The two other things that I take from Sanderson that are extremely important and that I'm trying to work on my best in my writing is character interactions is the first one. I think that's one of Brandon's strong suits, and he has a lot of them. But one of his strongest suits is the characters speaking with each other, the dialogue, the back and forth, the exchanges, the feelings towards one another. It feels very real and very natural. While reading, say, Donaldson's books, like I said before, is very kind of overtly dramatic, and the scenes are, intense in different ways. Brandon can cover a wide range of topics, from simple conversations that don't really matter, except for just character development, which is obviously important, but they're very simple on the face of it, to more complex examples of dialogue, whether there's tension, in the scene, or maybe it's a climactic event in the book, some battle. Brandon Sanderson's interaction with his characters are just the best. They're fantastic. So when I read his books, I really pay attention to how his characters interact with each other, just to understand more how to improve my writing there. And the last thing, and I think this is, if I've said anything so far, this is probably the most important, the payoff. So Brandon Sanderson requires you to invest a lot of time reading his books. And it better be for good reason too, right? There better be an amazing payoff at the end of it. I'm actually covering an episode pretty soon about my first core reader returned a book to me, and he said one of the positive things that he liked about my book was the payoff. He said the final few chapters just wrapped everything together, answered a lot of questions. New questions came up that were also answered, and he said the payoff was really solid. And to me, that's what readers are looking for, right? They're okay, and that a book should not be trash, right? But they're okay reading a couple chapters here and there that might be a little bit sluggish, a little bit slow, maybe to connect the dots. But in the end, they want to see that payoff. I want to see a payoff. I don't want to read a Sanderson book, read 1,200 pages, and then have nothing happen at the end, right? And Sanderson does an amazing job of giving the reader the payoff at the end of his books. So that's one thing that I really like from him. One thing that I haven't gotten from Sanderson yet, maybe it's just because a little bit of nostalgia, maybe from reading Tolkien and Donaldson as a kid, I don't get that sense of a real world when I read his books. That's not. I'll be careful what I say. That's not to say his worlds are not grand and real and epic in scale, and that he put a lot of thought into them. His worlds are amazing. But when I get done reading a Sanderson book, I don't find myself thinking afterwards, man, wonder what it would be like living in Roshar. and living in this city and this culture and interacting with this character. When I read his books, it kind of stays there, whereas with Tolkien and Donaldson, I find myself thinking about their worlds very frequently. And again, maybe that's just I don't know what it could be. A lot of different things. It could be, again, a sense of nostalgia. It could just be how my mind connects with the worlds of the other two. But anyway, that's kind of the comparison between Brandon between Sanderson and the other two. That's a little bit different. I think that is it. A little bit of a longer episode compared to what I usually do, but I believe. But I'm glad that you stuck around and kind of learned a little bit about what's influenced my writing. Now, to say all that, they've influenced me, but I very much want my own style of writing, right? I don't try to mimic certain styles that these authors do. I want my writing to be my own, right? But the way I go about it, the way I see epic fantasy is very much influenced by these authors. And again, I should have had a section here on Robert Jordan, but a shout out to him as well. So thank you for watching. Please comment, please like, watch this video all the way through, subscribe, do whatever you need to support me. Any little bit helps, and I'll be updating everyone on the release of my book. Hopefully in the near future, you'll be able to start pre-ordering for it. Thank you for your support this whole way. I really appreciate it. I'll see you next time.